So, should you actually be eating eggs every single day after 60, or is avoiding them quietly working against your body in ways you haven't even noticed yet? Because this is where a lot of people are still stuck on advice that is decades old. Some avoid eggs entirely because of cholesterol. Others eat them every morning and say they feel stronger, more energetic, even mentally sharper. And honestly, both sides sound reasonable on the surface. But here's what most people don't realize. After 60, your body doesn't just age, it changes how it responds to food. The same meals, the same habits, the same routines, they start producing different results than they used to. And that means what eggs do inside your body at 65 is not the same as what they did at 40. So before you decide whether eggs belong in your daily routine or not, you need to understand what's actually happening inside your body right now. Because once that becomes clear, the answer stops being confusing. I'm Dr. Sarah Ellison, and I've spent over a decade as a practicing physician working with patients over 60 who are trying to make smarter decisions about their health, not based on outdated fear, but based on how their bodies are actually functioning right now. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what daily egg consumption does to the aging body, the muscle effects, the brain connection, the eye health benefits, and yes, the cholesterol question, with the precision it actually deserves. By the end of this, you won't just know whether eggs are safe, you'll know how to use them in a way that genuinely supports how your body is changing. Let's get into it. Here's where this starts to matter in a very real way. After 60, one of the most significant shifts happening inside your body is something most people never notice directly because it doesn't show up as pain and it doesn't trigger an alarm. But over time, it changes almost everything. Muscle response begins to decline. And I'm not just talking about muscle size. I'm talking about your muscle's ability to respond to protein, to actually use what you eat and rebuild tissue from it. This is something well documented in aging research, and it has a name: anabolic resistance. What that means in practical terms is this: the same amount of protein you used to eat no longer produces the same muscle-maintaining effect it once did. Your muscles now require a stronger, higher quality signal to respond. And if that signal isn't there, the body starts drawing from what it already has. Now, why does this matter beyond just looking or feeling strong? Because muscle isn't just about strength. It's directly tied to your balance, your mobility, and your long-term independence. When muscle mass declines quietly over years, the consequences show up in ways people don't always connect back to nutrition: a fall, difficulty recovering from illness, reduced energy, slower metabolism. This is the foundation. And this is exactly where eggs become relevant in a very specific, targeted way. Here's something that most people get wrong, even those who are trying to do the right thing. When people realize they need more protein after 60, the most common response is to simply eat more protein: more chicken, more shakes, more bars. And while the intention is right, the approach often misses a critical variable: protein quality. Not all protein is used by your body the same way. Some sources provide protein that your body can efficiently convert into usable tissue. Others provide protein that is only partially absorbed or poorly utilized. This is measured by something called biological value. Essentially, how much of the protein you consume actually becomes functional body tissue. Eggs rank among the highest of any whole food on this scale. That means when you eat eggs, your body is getting protein it can actually use, efficiently, directly, without a significant amount being wasted. And after 60, when your muscles are already less responsive, this efficiency matters enormously. This is the mistake many people make without realizing it. They increase protein intake, but not protein quality. Weeks go by and nothing seems to change. Energy stays the same, strength doesn't improve, and it feels like the effort isn't working, when in reality, the body simply isn't getting the signal it needs in a form it can use. Eggs change that equation, but protein is only the beginning of what they offer. Think about this for a moment. Have you noticed small changes in memory or mental focus? Nothing dramatic, just slightly slower recall, a little more effort to concentrate, words that take a moment longer to come. These shifts are easy to dismiss or attribute to stress or poor sleep. But in many cases, there's something more specific happening at a nutritional level: choline. Eggs are one of the richest dietary sources of choline, and choline is not a nutrient most people think about, even though it plays a fundamental role in brain function. Your body uses choline to produce acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that is directly involved in memory formation, learning, and cognitive processing. Here's what makes this more relevant as you get older. Many adults, particularly those over 60, do not consistently reach recommended choline intake levels through their regular diet. And this isn't a deficiency that shows up dramatically overnight. It shows up gradually as cognitive function becomes slightly less sharp, slightly less reliable over time. When people increase their egg intake and report feeling mentally clearer, more focused, more on top of things, there is a real physiological explanation behind that. It's not a coincidence. It's choline doing what it's designed to do in a brain that was quietly running low on the raw material it needs. And this brings us to something else that becomes increasingly important after 60. Something most people never connect to their breakfast. After 60, your retina becomes more vulnerable to cumulative stress. Age-related changes in vision, reduced sharpness, increased sensitivity to glare, and in more serious cases, macular degeneration, are among the most common concerns for older adults. And while many people accept these changes as simply inevitable, what you eat plays a more direct role than most realize. Egg yolks contain two specific carotenoids, lutein and zeaxanthin. And what makes these compounds particularly significant is where they go inside your body. They are selectively concentrated in the retina, where they act as a natural protective filter against oxidative stress and light-related damage. Research consistently links higher intake of lutein and zeaxanthin with a lower risk of age-related macular degeneration and better overall visual function over time. These aren't marginal effects. They represent a meaningful difference in how the eye handles the daily stress it's exposed to. So now a pattern is starting to form. Muscle response is declining. Eggs address that. Cognitive signaling is slowing. Eggs address that too. Visual protection is becoming more important. And once again, eggs are providing something specific and targeted. 3 separate systems, one food providing meaningful support to all 3 simultaneously. That's not a coincidence, and it's not marketing. It's nutritional alignment with what the body is actively losing as it ages. And yet, this is usually the moment when a concern comes up, one that has kept people away from eggs for years. So let's address it directly and precisely. Cholesterol. It's the reason so many people over 60 still hesitate when it comes to eggs. And that hesitation is completely understandable, because for decades, the message was clear and consistent. Eggs raise cholesterol. High cholesterol causes heart disease. Therefore, limit eggs. But here's where the science has moved, and it's important to be precise about this rather than just say eggs are fine now without explaining why. When you eat dietary cholesterol from eggs or any other food, your body does not simply add that cholesterol directly into your bloodstream. The body is not passive in this process. It actively regulates cholesterol through a balance of internal production and absorption. And in most individuals, when dietary cholesterol increases, the body compensates by producing less of its own. This regulatory mechanism has been demonstrated in metabolic research, and it explains why different people respond to egg consumption very differently. Now, here's the nuance that matters. For most healthy individuals, moderate egg consumption has a relatively modest effect on LDL cholesterol compared to other dietary factors, refined carbohydrates, trans fats, and overall dietary patterns being significantly more impactful. At the same time, egg consumption has been shown in multiple studies to increase HDL cholesterol, the kind involved in moving cholesterol away from the arteries and back to the liver. But I want to be honest about one thing, because oversimplifying this doesn't serve you. Some individuals, often called hyperresponders, may see a larger LDL increase when consuming higher amounts of dietary cholesterol. If you have a known lipid disorder, poorly controlled diabetes, or a strong family history of cardiovascular disease, your situation warrants a more personalized conversation with your physician rather than a general guideline. That applies to any dietary change, not just eggs. Most people, however, the fear around eggs and cholesterol has been significantly overstated relative to the actual research. And critically, the context in which you eat eggs matters far more than the egg itself. A diet high in refined carbohydrates, processed meats, and low in fiber creates a metabolic environment that promotes inflammation and less favorable cholesterol patterns. Eggs placed into that environment will behave differently than eggs placed into a whole food, fiber-rich diet. The egg hasn't changed, the environment has, and that environment determines the outcome. This is where most people want a clear, direct answer, and I'm going to give you one, with the context it needs to actually be useful. The most common pattern I see is one of two extremes. Either people avoid eggs completely out of lingering caution, or they eat one egg occasionally without any real structure or intention. Neither approach gives you the benefits we've been talking about. Large observational studies have consistently shown that for most healthy adults, consuming around 1 to 2 eggs per day is not associated with increased cardiovascular risk, especially when the overall diet is stable and built around whole foods. That's a reasonable baseline. But here's where the conversation shifts specifically for people over 60. The goal is no longer just about avoiding risk. It becomes about maintaining function, muscle function, cognitive function, metabolic stability. And this is where the amount starts to matter differently. Because of anabolic resistance, older adults need a stronger protein signal per meal to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Research suggests that roughly 25 to 35 grams of high-quality protein per meal, depending on body size and activity level, is needed to create a meaningful muscle-maintaining response. One egg contains approximately 6 grams of protein. That means one egg alone is not going to move the needle. This is where many people unknowingly fall short. They treat eggs as a small addition to the meal rather than as a functional, central component of it. For most people over 60, a practical, functional range is 2 to 3 whole eggs per meal. For some, particularly those who are more active or have higher protein needs, 3 to 4 may be more appropriate. This isn't a rigid rule. It's a range based on what the body actually needs to respond. And this brings us to something equally important, because how many eggs you eat is only part of the picture. Here's where the benefit of eggs gets quietly canceled out for a lot of people, and they never realize it's happening. Think about a typical egg breakfast. Eggs with bacon or sausage, white toast, maybe a glass of orange juice. On the surface, it looks like a reasonable meal, but what's happening metabolically is a very different story. Processed meats like bacon and sausage have been consistently associated with higher cardiovascular risk across multiple large studies. Refined bread causes a rapid rise in blood glucose. Sugary drinks amplify that spike. And suddenly, your body is no longer responding to the eggs. It's responding to the entire pattern, and that pattern is working against you. This is where many people misinterpret what's going wrong. They assume eggs are the problem, when in reality, it's everything surrounding them. The shift is straightforward. Pair eggs with fiber-rich vegetables, leafy greens, sautéed spinach, tomatoes, bell peppers. Add whole food carbohydrates like legumes or sweet potato if needed. Use healthy fats like avocado or olive oil. In this context, blood sugar rises more gradually, satiety improves, and the overall nutritional profile supports exactly what the body needs after 60. The same egg, a completely different result. Now, there's one more common mistake worth addressing directly, and it's one I see frequently. Removing the yolk. This is usually done out of concern about fat or cholesterol. But when you remove the yolk, you're removing the majority of what makes eggs nutritionally powerful. The choline is in the yolk. The lutein and zeaxanthin are in the yolk. The fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K are in the yolk. What remains when you eat only the white is primarily protein, and while that protein is still valuable, you've lost most of the cognitive, visual, and absorptive benefits we've covered. Egg whites can be a useful addition when you need to increase protein volume without adding too much fat. But relying on whites alone removes the very things that make eggs uniquely beneficial for aging bodies. Let's talk about two details that don't get nearly enough attention: how you cook your eggs and when you eat them. On preparation, cooking method matters more than most people realize. High heat applied over longer periods can degrade certain heat-sensitive compounds in eggs, particularly the carotenoids, lutein, and zeaxanthin that we talked about in relation to eye health. This doesn't mean cooked eggs are harmful. Cooking actually improves protein digestibility, but there's a balance to find. Methods like soft boiling, poaching, or gently scrambling eggs over lower heat tend to preserve more of these sensitive compounds compared to frying at high temperatures for extended periods. You don't need to be perfect about this, but being mindful of preparation over time does influence what your body actually receives from the egg. Small, consistent choices compound. On timing, eggs are most commonly associated with breakfast, and there's actually a functional reason for that. After an overnight fast, your body tends to be more responsive to protein intake. The fasting window creates a state where a strong protein signal produces a stronger anabolic response. So consuming eggs in the morning after that period without food is a genuinely effective approach, not just tradition. That said, eggs are just as effective later in the day if your earlier meals were low in protein. What matters is not the clock, it's the context. If you haven't had adequate protein earlier in the day, eggs in the afternoon or evening can still produce a meaningful effect. Consistency, as always, matters more than timing perfection. Your body responds to patterns, repeated, stable signals. One excellent egg breakfast doesn't move the needle the way a consistent daily habit does. Over weeks and months, that repeated input starts to produce measurable, felt differences. By this point, you have everything you need to see eggs not as a trend, not as a controversy, but as a practical, targeted tool that aligns with what your body is actively going through after 60. Let me bring it all together clearly. After 60, your muscles become less responsive to protein. Eggs provide one of the highest quality protein sources available to counteract that. Your brain's production of acetylcholine becomes more dependent on consistent choline intake. Eggs are one of the richest sources you can eat. Your retina becomes more vulnerable to oxidative damage. Eggs deliver lutein and zeaxanthin directly where the body needs them. Your nutrient absorption becomes less efficient. Eggs provide fat-soluble vitamins in highly bioavailable forms. And the cholesterol concern, when placed in its proper context within a whole food diet for most healthy individuals, is significantly less impactful than the nutritional benefit eggs provide. None of this means eggs are a cure, a shortcut, or a replacement for overall healthy habits. Physical activity, hydration, adequate sleep, and regular medical care all remain foundational. What eggs offer is a concentrated, accessible, genuinely functional food that happens to address several of the body's key needs at the same time. The difference between people who get results and those who don't usually isn't whether they eat eggs, it's how they eat them, with intention, with the right pairings, with consistency, and with an understanding of what they're actually trying to support. After 60, health decisions become less about restriction and more about alignment, less about fear and more about function. And once you start seeing food through that lens, not as something to avoid, but as a system your body depends on, the choices become clearer. So, The question I'll leave you with isn't whether eggs are good or bad. It's whether your daily habits are giving your body what it needs to stay strong, sharp, and stable right now at this stage of life. Because that's the question that actually matters. If you found this helpful, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every subscriber helps us reach more people who need this kind of clear, practical health information. And I'll see you in the next video.